Well, Mike and I have a special surprise for everyone this month. It's that time of year where we do our critter or not. We got a lot of them today, so we got hopefully a fun quizzes for everyone. We've changed up a little bit. Let's see if, there we go. We've actually changed it up. Those of you who have been on the webinar before know this game a little bit, and we've actually modified it a tiny bit. Basically, we're going to have three options this time. So it's not just critter or not. It's going to be A, if you think it's a critter, an insect, mite, spider, vertebrate, or other animal. B, if you think this is an infection, a disease, or pathogen. C, if you think this is an abiotic problem, man-made issue, or another non-pest organism. So we will present you with some photos and ask you what you think it is. And this is kind of just going to be fun, and hopefully as you go along, you can keep track of your score. If you have a group, you can vote to see what the answer will be. Everybody record their scores, and at the end we'll see how people did. So everyone ready? I think so. All right. Well, the first one, critter or not. So I got this image in. This is on hemp from Henderson County. The inset is a closer screenshot from the computer. So I will launch the poll now. Let's see if I can. Is everybody there still? Not able to, oh, shoot. I can't get to my poll. Where is it? There at the top. Well, you didn't see anything there. All right. All right, here's the poll. Everybody see it?
Yes, the poll's
Great.
up.
All right. I love seeing that bar move up and down. Okay. We'll give it another 10 seconds maybe. And now I don't even have to count. It's got a little timer up at the top. All right, we'll end it there. Okay, we got... Okay, so we've got... Everybody see that? So we have a lot of people. This is critter. This is 70% of people, 38 respondents say critter. A couple say an infection, and some say, but 26% say neither. All right. So drum roll, please. Oops. Drum roll, please. This is a tricky one. These are actually the seeds of wood sorrel, oxalis. It is a very strange looking seed. Almost looks very much like an insect. The first time I saw one in a photo, I thought it might have been some kind of insect structure. But these seeds are actually shot out from the pods here and land on other surfaces, and sometimes are mistaken for insects or some kind of pest. So that was actually just resting on the leaf of the hemp plant right there. And luckily, I had experience with this, took these photos specifically even before because of how interesting looking those seeds were. Now, wood sorrel, of course, is a very common weed in a lot of areas, and it's recognized by these, looks like what you would draw as a clover in a cartoon with the heart-shaped leaflets, but this is obviously not a clover or related to clover. Okay, so I will move on to the next one, and Mike is going to present that. Mike, you ready?
I am. Matt has to change the slides here for us. Can everybody hear me, first of all?
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Okay.
All right, Mike, I'll move it over, change it over. Okay.
So these were leaves on a pecan tree here on campus in front of Nelson Hall, or Poole School of Management now. And I snatched them off the tree as I was walking past a couple of months ago here on campus. You can see these sort of interveinal blotchy yellow marks. And the question is, critter or not?
And we've got a little closer up just in case people want to see.
So Matt, if you could launch the poll, I don't think I can do that when you're sharing.
Let me do that. Let's see. Okay, is that launched? Great. All right. It's a battle.
Yeah, I like watching it go back and forth like that. Also, we're getting great participation this year. Maybe it's because the responses are anonymous that people are feeling a little bit less inhibited in venturing a guess when they're not sure. Whatever the reason, glad to see it.
It's a dead heat, just about. Okay, 55%, 56%. All right.
What dead heat? If that were
Close.
If that were an election, you said somebody won 58 to 40%, you'd say it was a landslide.
It was close. It just changed. All right. You call it, Mike, when you want to end.
All right. That's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we're going to end the poll, and we're going to share these results. Okay. So go ahead, Mike.
Well, I see that we have a significant landslide for infection, which is, kind of what I thought when I grabbed it. I thought maybe it was some kind of a downy mildew or something, but we have something else entirely here.
Yeah, so this is actually critter. So now the only thing I found on these leaves were some yellow pecan aphids, which can cause honeydew and sooty mold and things like that. But it's actually this black pecan aphid, Melanocallis cariofoliae, really pretty little shiny black with white spots aphid. But the feeding damage from this species causes that distinct intervanal chlorosis, very drastic, and in high numbers, these can actually cause defoliation on pecan trees. And so they can be a major pest. The yellow ones are less so. There's actually another species. There's 3 different genera, 3 different species on pecans specifically. Another one is yellow, but holds its wings flat and has a black margin. But the black one is actually the one that's causing that yellowing. Okay, well, great.
So Matt, I think you're the only one who would describe that black pecan aphid as pretty.
It is pretty. It's a cute one. It's a nice little aphid. It's got these weird little projections on its side. It's a lot different than some of the other aphids you'll find. But this is a cool little group of aphids that are on pecans, and some of their other relatives are on some other trees around. All righty. Next one. Critter or not. This is buttonbush from my yard. Cephalathus is the genus. So we can see this. There's these blotches all over it. I'll zoom in a little bit on the next slide so you can see this is what's going on with it. So what do you think? Critter or not? Relaunched? Okay. I think I just planted this last year from a small sapling, and it is now taller than I am. Hoping to get it bushier, and yeah.
So it survived then. I guess that was you gave something away there.
I gave something away. It survived. No. All right. Give it another 10 seconds. All right. We are going to close it and the polling now. Okay, we got a lot of people thinking it's an infection. And then about exactly equal for critter or neither. All right, well, very interesting. Let's see. Okay, so this is actually an interesting situation. I don't know if we can see Mike. Would we'll go to the answer. No, that's the poll. Let's see. All right, it's not. Actually, this is chemical burn from stain stripper. So we had our deck stripped and restained, and there was a lot of overspray, and the bush was right below our deck. Now, if we go back, maybe we can kind of suss out why you would think it was something like that rather than a disease. What do you think, Mike?
Well, one thing with diseases, of course, the part that Matt didn't mention was the timing, and I'll let him do that in a minute. But also, you'll notice the pattern of these. Sometimes the shapes are very irregular, and if it were an infection, let's say a specific local infection by a fungus or a bacterium, the spots would be less variable in shape. Now, you can sometimes get some strange patterns like this from a virus, but again, you wouldn't necessarily rule that out at the start if you just saw the pictures alone. But then you start digging into other things like the timing of the appearance, which Matt will.
Yep. So ask everybody questions about whether they've had anything sprayed, or, we've had issues where people dump bleach water over their balcony and it lands on a plant and ruins some of the foliage, even just half of the plant. Another couple clues were, I didn't show it here, and actually some of the master gardeners actually had a preview of this, because I brought in the sample for the Master Gardener College, and what had happened is actually the new growth was perfectly fine on this. So that's another clue. And another thing I saw in this photo later on was that you can see this very nice patch of very clean leaf that was blocked by this other leaf. So basically the patterns are only where the spray lands. And so it with all those clues together, you can figure out that this was chemical damage. So the timing that Mike was referring to, I think, was that the recent work with chemicals around the area. So it's always good to ask somebody whether they've had, especially if you're suspicious that it's not a disease or something like that, just see if they've had any exposure to chemicals the plants have around their yard. Okay, Mike.
So this came from my yard. I had a very nice time this year growing a heritage type bean. It's kind of a bush bean that sends up runners. You have to train it up. And it's the first time I've ever grown beans for the dry beans. Haven't eaten them yet, but looking forward to that. And was a little bit concerned when early on in the season, back in June, I saw these very discrete leaf spots on there. So without saying what I thought it was at the time or what it turned out being, let's ask you, critter or not? So people are still actively going, but I'll give you another 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, wait, what if people are voting? What if there's rooms with hundreds of people watching and they're tallying the votes before they can register them? We haven't maybe been fair to those folks. 2, 1, 0.
Okay. All right.
Oh, well, it looks like folks were smarter than me in this particular case, because I thought I had something like a Cercospora leaf spot, but got to the clinic and sure enough, folks who said critter were correct.
Yep. So actually you can kind of see it here, but the question is, what is it? Okay, we know now, if you all know this is a leaf miner, but it's a blotch leaf miner. And what's in there? Anybody want to guess? What type of, it's an insect, I'll tell you that much. All right. This is an interesting one. I really was super excited when Mike brought this in because this is not a typical leaf miner, say, in the Diptera. So the agromyzid flies often are very common leaf miners. This wasn't a caterpillar either. This is one of the leaf mining beetles. This is a type of bean leaf miner, and there's several species in this tribe, Calipini, which are really pretty beetles. I'll show you in a second. But they have these very flattened larvae with big, goofy legs. And they get a little fatter when they're older, and this was a little bit younger. I wasn't able to rear them out to get the species specifically, but you can tell they're not a caterpillar because under the abdomen it wouldn't have crochets or prolegs. The heads of caterpillar leaf miners are typically a little bit thinner and pointier, and they have much smaller, less fleshy thoracic legs right here. And these actually grow up to be something like this. It's a really pretty leaf beetle. You often see them on leaves, some of them, and as adults, they will actually feed on the leaves, skeletonizing leaves of the host or other plants. There's one that feeds on locusts and mines and locusts as larvae. This one specifically is more uses the host soybeans and other beans. So it could have been this one, but there are a few species that feed on beans. So just holding it up to the light, you would have pretty easily seen that. But when they're near the ground and you're just looking at the surface, it just looks like a blotch, like a leaf spot or something like that. All right. Okay, next one. All right, critter or not. This was on hemp. I'm not sure what county it was from. It was sent in by email to me. And this is on the underside of the hemp leaf. Now, I don't know if I should move on to the next slide, but something similar right here. Okay, so critter or not. Okay, let's give everybody about a minute or so. Yep, and groups have to work it out, how they want to vote, how they want to answer. All right, in 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to end that, and we're going to share the results. Okay, we got 50% of people thought it was a critter, a few people thought it was an infection, and 42% thought it was neither. All right, so drum roll, please. This is an interesting one. I was surprised to see a few submissions of this year, but this is almost certainly the eggs of horse or deer flies. Now, these biting, blood-sucking flies lay eggs usually on the undersides of leaves around aquatic or semi-aquatic areas. In fact, this last one was on a pool toy in somebody's yard. And so, again, very close aquatic situation, the larvae will hatch and drop off into that situation. Now, I will say this is possibly the eggs of aquatic soldier flies in the Stratiomyidae. They're somewhat close but distant relatives of horse flies related to black soldier fly, but the aquatic groups will lay eggs in masses similarly, usually yellow or orange, and don't turn black. The ones made by horse and deer flies in the family Tubakia turn this jet black. And actually, there's one genus of horsefly fairly rarely seen, and I don't even think it bites humans, but the mother actually stays with the eggs and guards them. And it's one of the few instances in flies where they have maternal care, or at least for a short time. But anyway, we got a few of these, and they are, they can obviously be disposed of to get some of the biting flies out of the population, but you can see this nice picture by Charlie Eisman of this female deer fly laying these batches of eggs. All right, thanks everyone. Okay, next one.
So this one was submitted by, Louise Romanoff, wasn't she? She was the one who brought it in, as I recall.
Yep.
Rhododendron, and it looks pretty good here in this photograph. But if we take a closer look, we can see what she was concerned about. The upper surface of the leaves seems to be fine. This is one of the deciduous azalea types? Was that
Yeah,
right?
I forget which one it was. I think it was one of the native kind of wild types. It wasn't really one of the more cultivated, I think.
One of the horticultural ones.
It was interesting. Yeah. And then
Certainly that. And as you look on the underside, then there were these sort of bell-shaped
mhm.
structures or growths or whatever you
We've
want to
got one
call
more
them.
photo if you want to see.
And let's do that. Hanging from the underside. So the
Yep.
great question that she and Matt and I had was, is this a critter or not? So I see that infection here pulled ahead early and is maintaining that lead. Looks like people are pretty much decided, in fact. So we'll
Yeah.
give about another 5 seconds here.
Okay.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
There we have it. Yeah, so yes, infection, it is indeed. The reason we weren't sure at the beginning was that there are some mites that will actually cause similar type galls, but this one turned out to be the fungus Exobasidium, which we've seen before. We talk about it from time to time on this program. It's causing leaf galls on camellia early in the season, just a thickening of the leaves, kind of a whitish coloration to them. And sometimes on azalea, making a blistering sort of, if one would call it a gall on the leaf. But before we had not seen this particular symptom being caused by it, but I did a cross section of these, looked at it under the microscope and found the layer of spore producing cells on the lower surface of these galls. And sure enough, it was Exobasidium. So there are different species, and I'm not sure exactly why these galls have this particular shape, if it has to do with the species of the fungus, the species of the plant, or the interaction of the two.
Mike, I have a question. Are ericaceous hosts more prone to Exobasidium?
Well, between the ericaceous host, yeah, like a blueberry, we talked about a Exobasidium leaf spot this year on PPP. And Gailusackia, I remember seeing a leaf spot on that. Of course, azalea, now camellia would be different, but very often, yeah, these are. And isn't there one on Simplocus also? I'm getting something confused there. I'm not sure. But yeah, a lot of them are ericaceous.
All right. Okay. We've got a Euonymus americanus with this going on. This is actually in my yard. I was very happy that it popped up in my yard and have been trying to keep it alive and happy and everything for its nice blooms and fruit. Okay, and then we'll just go a little closer up. So, critter or not? Let's relaunch this poll. All right.
As people are voting there, I'm looking it up, and yes, Simplocus, it's an Exobasidium simplosi that causes that bud gall on Simplocus.
Interesting.
Don't see that very often.
I like Exobasidium. I think it's pretty interesting looking. I guess I have a thing for galls anyway. Alrighty, let's end it now. I think everybody's done their voting. All right, so we've got critter is edging out neither. We got 45% critter, 37% neither, and 18% infection. All right, this was an interesting one related to recent events. So this is actually hail damage. My yard got hit real hard with hail a few months ago, as did many areas recently with some of the strong storms. And basically, the hail was fairly large, basically almost ice cube size, and coming down at great velocities. You can tell. Basically, I saw other plants, a lot of other plants in the area with rips in their leaves, things like that, including that buttonbush that got hit by the chemicals and the hail, which was great. But you can tell partly because it's healing back nicely and it's on these upper surfaces or side surfaces. You wouldn't find it on the lower surfaces or below. It's also various sizes, and it's really kind of just uh, broken open. It's not really chewed or anything like that. And so again, like the chemical burn, it's nice to know whether there are other plants in the area affected by this, because again, it wouldn't be host specific. Other types of signs. Mike, do you have anything to add about hail damage?
No, except obviously that you could, those who voted for infection might be right in the future if there was some kind of a fungus that got in there, or bacterium. I don't know of any that would get specifically on the euonymus, but that is now in an open infection court for possible
yeah.
pathogens.
Good to know. Good to know. All right. So
we're back to my garden here, and I'm happy to report this year I finally got success again with tomatillos. For some reason, oftentimes, especially at the beginning of the season, the flowers would just drop off and never get fruit set, but things look good this year. And normally, of course, these are covered with a sort of a husk. If you haven't grown them before or seen them in the store, used a lot in Mexican cooking. My wife is Mexican, for those who didn't know that. And on this particular fruit, see it's fairly small. That's a centimeter ruler there below. There were these sort of white areas. We can go up a little closer. That have a fairly irregular appearance, a little bit of a star-like border to them, not a real smooth border. And so the question is this from a critter or not? Matt, have you ever tried growing tomatillos?
no, I haven't actually. Are they pretty upright, or how do they grow?
They get, at least in my experience, they get very bushy and leggy. So
maybe on the list for next year.
Because I know you like salsas.
Yeah, I know. I love salsa verde. All right. Looks like it's stabilized. Ooh, it was a close one.
Yeah, really. About evenly. I think. Statistically, you couldn't determine the difference between this and a toss of a three-headed coin. So let's just end bowling there. Wow, critter just barely edged out. Share those results. And yes, once again, from my garden, it wasn't a disease, it was a critter.
Yeah, so this is pretty characteristic of stink bug damage. I'm always confused, as there is a possibility of other bugs causing similar damage. So without a culprit, it's hard to really know, but with the size of those feeding spots and the commonness of stink bug damage on especially tomatoes and peppers, other solanaceous fruits, that basically they insert their stylets and they suck out the color, and this star-shaped or kind of flower-shaped white spot, if you cut into it, you'll get a little bit of kind of corkiness or a bit of sponginess under the fruit. And basically, this is when the bug sticks their stylets in. They're going to suck out those juices, the chlorophyll, everything like that, and it'll leave these white spots all over.
And I see Debbie Dillon has a message, and I was going to say the very same thing. I didn't put 2 and 2 together until just now, but I have a lot of leaf-footed bugs on those tomatillos.
Yeah, so that's the other thing is that that leaf-footed bugs and stink bugs are very closely related, so they're going to do very similar damage, especially size-wise. The interesting thing is if you also look at other bug like garden flea hoppers and cicadelids and things like that, the leaf hoppers on the leaves of plants, they're going to have that same little star-like damage. It's going to be much smaller. So on fruits and seeds, fruits with seeds, it's typically leaf-footed bugs or stink bugs. And just take a look at what you have there in your garden. All right. Okay, and then Rich says tomatillo can be invasive. I've had them pop up all over my garden, and the tomatillos don't even get better every year, so that's a shame. I don't know, Mike, have you had that experience?
They do, of course. There's a lot of things that do that. Sometimes because of having composted cantaloupes and things, we'll get volunteer vegetables of different kinds, but it's never been something that has been difficult to control at the end of the day. But they do get very hungry for space, especially as the season moves on. So you've got to be prepared to kind of have them staked up.
Yeah, our tomatoes are doing that too. We've had a lot of volunteer plants from the compost and from previous year's tomatoes kind of falling off accidentally and squirrels getting them and everything like that. Well, thanks for your comment, Debbie, also about the leaf-footed bugs. It's good to know. All right, the last one for today, Lantana, Wake County. So we got this small Lantana. It is looking a bit crunchy and a bit not very green. Here's a little bit closer. So is this, so basically this was on NCSU campus and very crunchy and everything. Then I noticed in my yard, my Lantana, having basically the buds were becoming burned, just really not good looking. Now, luckily, I think it's grown out of it a little bit, but it just wasn't looking good. So, what do we think?
I can really hear the wheels turning on this one.
I don't know how people feel about Lantana. I enjoy ours just because they attract a lot of really nice insects. And that's what I'm all about, of course. All right, we'll give everybody about 10 more seconds. All right, we're gonna stop the polling now. Okay, a lot of people said neither, and almost an even split between critter and infection. So this was an interesting one. This is actually a lace bug, the Lantana lace bug. So this really surprised me. I was not familiar with this insect. We got the samples in from campus. Now, if you looked on the undersides of the leaves, just like other lace bugs, they're very messy. You can see here all the fecal spots everywhere. It's not as lacy as, say, the azalea lace bug or those. It's in a whole different group of lace bugs that are much more subtle looking, elongate. They've got this little nubby end of the antenna. The nymphs look like this, little spiky critters, and these are actually nymphal skins. And basically, this lace bug causes stippling damage. You can actually see it back here. There's a pretty extensive stippling damage, just like other lace bugs cause. But their saliva and their feeding causes the flower buds and some terminal growth to actually burn and die off. So, like I said, luckily near the end of the summer, this plant started to flower more. I had one about 20 feet away that did not have the lace bugs really extensive on them, and it had very nice flowers from the get-go. But it is something that will cause issues at least part of the season, it looked like.
So Matt, I'll add from my years in Pender County, it's a really common pest at the coast.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to come inland it seems to be later in the year when it comes inland. But one thing I've noticed before is often the first symptom that Lantana has lace bug is it stops blooming. And I was really interested in your picture where you showed the flower buds shrivel up before the leaves really started to look crunchy.
Yep.
And that certainly matches what I see in the landscape.
Oh, I'm glad you made that comment. So after we tally it up, I'm going to just talk a tiny bit more about Lantana lace bug and then about a few more insects real quick before we get to Mike. But how about this? Let's tally it up. So how did everyone do? So I'll launch a poll. Let's see. We'll launch A through E. All right. So how did everybody do? Now we obviously make this a little bit tricky. These are things that come in that are pretty interesting, pretty curious, and so it's don't feel bad if you didn't get 100% of them, which doesn't look like anybody did, but that's good. We want to keep everybody on their toes and everybody just observing and not kind of trying to fit everything into a box and being open to what's out there.
I think you had a question about the lace bug.
Yeah,
how did you treat it?
Yeah, so I would imagine I didn't actually treat mine. I have a feeling, and I'll get to this in a second, that if we have a cold winter, it's going to kind of knock them back to the coast again. So, you know, as far as on the coast, basically, I think a typical lace bug treatment, making sure to pay attention to the undersides of the leaves early in the year when the growth is new and the lace bugs start to hatch. I think that will be basically the best time to treat and best method to treat. Okay, so I'm going to end this polling. So, 3 to 4 correct is the most. It's kind of a nice bell curve. So basically, again, we're doing this to kind of have fun with it and put some interesting things out there. It's not, it's more for your experience and enjoyment. So thanks for participating. We enjoy doing this too. And I am going to quickly go through my part so that Mike can get to his part. So back to that Lantana lace bug. It's the Teleonemia scrupulosa is the name of the species. It is actually native to the southern southeastern part of the U.S. through northern Chile. And it's actually been imported in many tropical areas, especially Pacific Islands, to control lantana. So that reduction in the flowers and the buds and then of course the seeds later on is really important to keep it from being invasive, the lantana. It also feeds on leucophyllum and a few other plants. Apparently it's a pest of sesame in Africa, but it is native to our area again. But like Charlotte said, it's much more common on the coast, and the only specimens I saw in our collection were actually from the southeastern part of the state. So what I'm thinking is that just like this year has a lot of insects, I think what happened was that the winter wasn't very cold. There was a lot of warmth early in the year. They were able to spread, or they weren't killed where they came last year, where they spread last year, and so they were more common in areas more inland. So we'll see if we get a cold winter this year. Maybe they'll knock back and we won't have the problem next year. But this was definitely a new pest for me. Okay, a couple of other things. So we've gotten a lot of photos in recently of this happening to rosemary and some other herbs in the Lamiaceae. This kind of webbing and gross, dead leaves, bundles, things like that. And the first instance of it actually came from Minda Daughtry in Lee County. And so I was really happy that she sent me some photos of what it was. And she asked me how to prepare these specimens. And she brought some specimens to me. I reared some out and we had some fun learning about them. And this is actually the southern purple mint moth, Pyrausta laticlavia. I actually emailed Jim Baker, who was now retired, but was in our department, expert in all things insects in gardens and whatnot, and he had never even seen it. So it was really interesting that this was fairly new also this year. So it's a year of a lot of crazy things, it seems.
And
These
I'll
are,
add, oh,
what's
I'm
that?
sorry, Matt. I was going to add, I had seen that one a lot in Pender County and New Hanover as well. So it's interesting. It's also showing up further inland this year.
Yeah, and I have here, it's perhaps moving northward. Actually, in California, it is more recently now in the San Francisco area. So we could probably blame global warming and climate change for a lot of these things. Especially, again, like I said, I think this winter wasn't cold enough to kill a lot of these insects, and so basically they're around more. So again, these are small moths, about 3/8 of an inch, about a centimeter long. The larvae a little bit longer. They're found across the U.S. and native here, and they feed on various Lamiaceae, so rosemary, thyme, mints, etc. There's several similar-looking species in the genus Pyrausta around. So let's see. So here's some of the damage. Basically, webbing, frass with bundles of dead or skeletonized leaflets. And basically, you should be able to find the caterpillars. The caterpillars are this tannish yellow almost with these very bold black spots, almost like a domino or a checkerboard. And thankfully, like I said to Minda for bringing those by. And so I was able to photograph it. I was surprised that they pupate on the plant in a little silken area. So you can see this is the shed head of the larva before it turned into a pupa. And then lastly, the moth looks like this, very pretty, but of course a pest. And what's interesting, I reared a few of these, and they actually have a fairly variable color pattern. So it's the basic pattern is the same, but the extent of the yellow versus the pink or purple, of course it's called the purple mint moth, varies. As far as control, I don't know of a good way. When they're young, they're easier to control with BT, but because they create that webbing and all that debris, it's very difficult, I think, for to be a lot of contact. So when they feed on the new growth that has BT, that might help. Otherwise, I didn't get a lot of, I asked some people around, but people weren't familiar enough to know exactly what to do on these kinds of on these kinds of situations. Is it safe to cook the parts that do not have debris? Yes, it should be. So the areas that have the webbing and the frass probably can be pruned out as well. But yeah, anything above or below that's not affected, you should be able to take the leaves off. Of course, there's always leaf hopper damage on my rosemary too, but basically it's not unsafe. Okay, we also got a lot of photos of this critter. Really crazy looking, and luckily the one on the redbud, Jen McGuinn or Jan McGuinn, she sent me in some specimens that I requested, and this is a really cool caterpillar, the white flannel moth caterpillar. This is Norapia ovina. This is a venomous or stinging caterpillar. It's related to the pus moth, the one that looks like a big toupee, but this one has much sparser hairs, and these are actually the stinging pustules. Basically, they have these long stinging setae on them. This is what the adult looks like. It's a very pretty little white moth. Very, very noticeable, but again, care should be taken when working in plants that have these, as they do sting, can cause a blistering red welt for a little bit. There are 2 generations in North Carolina, and they pupate on the branches where they all overwinter. And the hosts include things like redbud, black locust, hackberry, and other deciduous trees. All right, very quickly, BOLOs. So univoltine, the one generation a year insects and our other arthropods are getting their biggest, and this includes wasp nests. So you're going to see a lot more orb weavers, black and yellow garden spiders. A lot of mantises are becoming full grown at this time of year, and biting off heads. And of course, wasp nests are the biggest and probably most aggressive at this time of year. What's the best way to preserve caterpillars and maintain their color? So I actually showed Minda my technique for preserving caterpillars. Unfortunately, it does not preserve color very well. The black spots on them will be preserved, but there's not many ways to preserve the color very well in caterpillars. But the best way to preserve caterpillars is to put a little bit of water in the microwave, boil it, take it out, and then drop the caterpillars in the boiling water. It'll stop boiling after you take it out of the microwave, but put them in there, let them cook a little bit, and then transfer that to some 70% alcohol, and that will expand them and make them soft, but also will keep them from rotting. So I can tell you all about that more later if you'd like. And last bolos are things like the blue-winged wasps. These are going to hunt scarab beetle larvae in the soil. You're going to have a lot of goldenrod insects on the goldenrod. You may have fall armyworms in your lawns this year, depending. It's hard to say. This is a good time to remove bagworms from plants, as the females will have mated by now and laying eggs, and these eggs are overwintering in the bags. And look out for your peach trees and other close relatives for peach tree borers that look like wasps but are actually a moth laying eggs. All right. And with that, I will stop sharing and let Mike take over.
All right, sorry, I had my microphone off there. One thing that wasn't on your list, Matt, but I don't know if you want to make mention of, is the mosquitoes this time of year, especially with all the rains that we've been having recently.
Yeah, I mean,
I killed one in the office here, sitting, getting ready for PP&P. So.
Oh, well, watch out for mosquitoes, people. I think, yeah, it's always a risk during this time of year. And yeah, since we've been getting a lot more rain, that's when we get a lot more, obviously, where their larvae can survive.
All right, let me see, find my. So can everyone see a full screen picture of a mystery photo pair?
Yes.
Looks good from here.
All right. There we go. I'd lost my chat box when I went to the screen share. So I'm going to start out in the spirit of critter or not with a different sort of question with this pair of photographs. And the mystery is, well, first of all, neither one is appearing in actual size on your screens. And I wanted to pose the question, which of the two sets of pictured structures are actually larger in real life? So I'm going to see if I can launch a, no, this was a different poll that I just launched, the A through E, but go ahead and choose A or B on that one as to which you think is larger in real life. And if you actually know what one or the other is, don't spill the beans yet, because I will save that as a suspenseful thought until the end of my program here. So now someone put C. That's interesting. All right, give another few seconds here. 3, 2, 1. Okay. And we have, it looks like the B's have it. The votes are that the structure on the right there is the larger of the two in real life, and we'll see if that's true or not in a few minutes. I'll share those results with you, and then move on to a couple of diseases that I want to highlight this particular program. Now, the photograph that you see is not from here and not from now. You can probably guess by the big aerial sticking out of above the roof of the house there. This is from Bugwood, Penn State being the original source of it. And this I vote for as the plant disease most often self-diagnosed. Very often people will think they have Verticillium wilt, and it very seldom is. For some disease, I think it's because there's just a lot of good information out there on the internet about it, and people, as they're looking for diseases, especially on maples, are running into Verticillium wilt publications and concluding that that's what they have. It can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it's a very rapid decline, sometimes it's slower, and it can show up as certain branches flagging individually first, as you see in the photograph here. It didn't include a picture of any of the close-ups of the leaf symptoms, but I did include this, and it's the reason for bringing it up on the program today, because we got a sample from Western Carolina University, and this was the sample. It was submitted as an insect issue, and you can see there's on the kind of back edge there, closer to my finger, the remains of a borehole from some insect activity, and it was submitted as an insect. But the more important thing that you'll notice is the pointer here. All right, is that showing up, the pointer on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Maybe I should use a different sort of indicator here. Let's try this. So along here, that discoloration in the sapwood, you can see it really well in the cross section here as well. And I didn't realize this, but apparently that green coloration is fairly typical when this occurs in maple. And this turned out by isolations to be Verticillium, and particularly the species Verticillium dallii, which I'll mention a little bit more in a moment. Let's go back to the still have my little markers on here. Excuse me, let me clear those off. The fungus, Verticillium, actually there are two species, Verticillium dallii and Verticillium alboatrum, but it seems that in North Carolina, at least over the last several years, the ones that we've identified to species have been Verticillium dallii. This one is a little bit more tolerant of higher temperatures than the other species, although there are different strains within each species that can vary in their temperature tolerances, I understand. One problem with this is that there are so many different hosts of these fungi. Also that they are persistent in the soils, that will survive there from year to year. The fungus Verticillium dallii produces little microsclerotia, small survival structures, that aids that process. So the infection occurs through the roots, but then it colonizes the xylem. The good thing is that Verticillium is not tolerant of heat, and this is why most of you won't be seeing it. There is a photograph here of a tomato plant that Inga Meadows took. You'll notice that there's the wilting. This can be that sort of wilting that starts during the day and then the plant recovers at night initially. You may read that there are V-shaped yellow and then brown areas that develop on the tomato leaves when they're infected with Verticillium wilt. Kind of a nice coincidence there, but that isn't always going to be the case, as you can see in this photograph here. Notice though that it's the lower leaves that are turning yellow and brown. If you were to look for vascular discoloration, you would find it, but it wouldn't be as severe as if you had Fusarium wilt. I think I'm talking about tomato here. And the overall plant may actually survive, but just have reduced production. And of course, any loss of leaves can lead to fruit being exposed to the sun. So why did I mention this about the heat? Let's see. So I looked at our diagnoses that we have in the database, some of them that we did here and some of them that Inga Meadow did and was kind enough to put into the database so we'd have the data there. If you'll notice, most of them are actually in the mountains. So the black-eyed Susan was actually from one of her research plots. Maple, the most recent one, and an earlier Japanese maple there in Buncombe County, a couple of eggplant samples, which is one of the hosts that is really susceptible to Verticillium. And that tomato, which unfortunately was a variety called Biltmore that's, at least they looked it up online, supposed to be resistant to Verticillium. So I'm not sure exactly what happened there, if we're dealing now with another race or what the reason that particular plant was susceptible. The bleeding heart from a nursery, that we can almost not really consider as a North Carolina problem necessarily because we don't know where they had imported the plant from. So it was not an actual landscape or field situation. There's okra sample from Orange County, cotton and potato and field crops out in the northeastern corner of the state. But the pattern, I think, is helpful, and that if you think that you have, let's say, Verticillium Wilt on tomato, and you live somewhere east or south, east and south of Wake County, that is not what you have. So again, you may see a lot of information about Verticillium Wilt online, but the odds that you actually have it are fairly low. So these, something like 10 samples, represent all that we've seen since 2008 here at the clinic, plus the ones that Inga had added. If you do have it though and get it diagnosed, there's a few things that you can do to try and manage it. Since it infests the soil, make sure that you keep equipment clean and tools and so forth after working in that area so that you don't move the microsclerotia or other propagules from one site to another. Also, if you have a tree that died from verticillium and you have it chipped, don't try and make mulch out of that. It should be removed and destroyed so that it doesn't propagate the disease elsewhere. Use non-host trees such as, for example, oaks and dogwoods, and I mentioned those specifically because they were other samples, or I'm sorry, other trees that were mentioned by the person who submitted the maple recently, but those would not be hosts. And within the vegetables, the use of resistant varieties is still a good strategy, and a crop rotation, according to what I read, of 4 years or more. Some of the references, and we can put these out after the program, the actual links, but the Iowa State University, Michigan State, and University of Wisconsin have some publications about this. And if you're particularly interested in lists of plants that are susceptible or resistant or immune, then the longer lists are in the publication by the University of Massachusetts, and also a very long list published by the University of California. Another plant that I wanted, or excuse me, a disease that I wanted to talk about was exemplified by this boxwood that came in from a nursery this month. And Danny Lauderdale brought it in, and of course, a very experienced agent, and noticed that there was something odd here. He did see some rotted roots, but he also was concerned about some kind of blight. Now, the reason we wouldn't think too much about boxwood blight is we don't see really the defoliation or the black streaks on the green twigs. But he was correct in thinking that there was something else going on. And after I examined it further at the bases of the dead areas, and notice those sharp transitions, especially the one on the far or near the right of the photograph, you can see that very sharp transition between what's living and what's dead on that twig. And at that transition zone, I found the fungus that was responsible for the damage, which is different from the volutella, a different fungus that you can see sporulating heavily on the leaves farther up. So the actual culprit was there at the transition zone, which killed the twig from that point forward, and then the volutella was able to take advantage. That's something we usually consider to be a stress type pathogen, the volutella. Things that are under, let's say, drought stress, or in this case where the twig has been girdled. It seems to be why that was popping up. But the actual responsible fungus was a species called Calototricum. This disease is known as Boxwood Stem canker, or also as Boxwood dieback, and it's a true fungus. The species is called Calototricum theobromicula, which is a synonym for Calototricum fragarii, which you may guess from the name is something that happens on or occurs on strawberries, but has an extremely wide host range also, everything from palms to strawberries to boxwoods. And it's a localized infection, which will give us some possible control through pruning. I'll say that in a moment. And you can distinguish it from boxwood blight again because the leaves, although they turn yellow, they tend to hang on to the plant. Another thing to look for, not 100% of the time, but it's a pretty good clue, is if you're looking under the bark at the base of the affected area, you'll see that the stem has taken on a really dark, shiny black color. Now this can happen with Phytophthora root rot also, but that would only be really at the very base of the plant. If you're seeing it higher up, then you want to suspect this particular disease. Also with Phytophthora root rot, you tend to see more of a wilting aspect to the foliage rather than the just yellowing. The problem is that this disease doesn't always, in fact, most of the time, my experience, I think most of the time it's been with some other kind of problem. This particular picture is the first time that we saw it at the clinic back in a home landscape, I think it was, or a commercial landscape from Lincoln County in November of 2014. And that plant also had Phytophthora root rot and also had nematodes. So just because you have boxwood stem canker doesn't mean you don't have other things as well, which means that pruning may or may not work. Obviously, if you've got Phytophthora root rot, then pruning isn't going to be effective. But if this is all you have, then one strategy would be to go several inches below that infected area on a dry day, so you're not spreading the spores around. They're going to be the sticky type and not spread easily on the wind, but they could be splashed by water or carried on tools as you cut one branch after another. One problem also with the pruning strategy is that since this has a very long incubation period, you may have stems that look good now, but they're actually infected and they may decline later. You just didn't see the symptoms to be able to prune them out. And my final problem that I wanted to highlight here was from campus. This particular willow oak, which is just a few hundred feet from where I'm sitting, has had for the last several weeks, actually over a month, dropped a lot of its leaves. And if you look at those leaves on the ground, you can see that there's a lot of leaf spots on them. Now, I can't guarantee that the spots are causing the defoliation, but this is a disease that, if it's heavy enough, can cause defoliation. And it turns out it's something called Tubakia leaf spot. So you notice some very nice brown spots. They tend to start very small early in the year, and then as leaves reach their end of their useful life and start senescing, then the fungus gets the upper hand and tends to expand the size of those spots. And by looking at it under the microscope, you can get the definite diagnosis, and these are the fruiting bodies of the fungus Tubakia dryina. Not a real concern for the health of the tree. I'm more concerned that there might be some other underlying problem that's stressing this tree, and that's why the Tubakia was taking off so much. But both Chuck and I like to say that leaf spot diseases on deciduous trees are not in almost never a real threat to the health of the tree. Those leaves will eventually be lost, and they can even tolerate a certain amount of defoliation and refoliate without losing their long-term prospects. So Tubakia turned out to be what one of those photographs was in the original mystery photo. And now let's see what the other one was. The source of this was the NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. This is a sunspot. And those granules, they're called, on the surface of the sun, I didn't know this until I looked this up, but they're each the tops of the convection cells there on the photosphere of the sun. Each of those little cells is 1,000 kilometers across, so that spot would be over the size of the diameter of the planet Earth. So this was, in fact, those who said this was the larger of the two were absolutely correct. It's also a really interesting thing about creation is how two very different processes can result in some rather similar looking structures in the case of a fruiting body of a fungus and a sunspot. Moving then along to our BOLOs, things to be on the lookout for in the month of September. With turf grasses, some of the same things we've been talking about for a while now. Brown patch still on your cool season grasses. And if you look down to the fourth point there, large patch on the warm season. Those are both caused by Rhizoctonia, but one tends to affect cool season grasses in hot weather and the other warm season grasses in cool weather. The gray leaf spot on fescue and St. Augustine grass, which has been somewhat on the increase in years recently. You can see pictures there on the right. Fairy ring, I didn't get a picture. I wanted to of a neighbor's yard that had a beautiful fairy ring with not only the green ring where the grass was fertilized by the decaying thatch, but also the mushrooms popping up in it. And some of those mushrooms and puffballs in fairy rings can be poisonous, so be sure and get those removed if you've got children there in the yard. Summer patch, it's not summer really too much anymore, but Summer patch can still be something to look for in September, as well as chinch bugs on St. Augustine grass. I know that's an insect, but I'm tossing that in there as well. And Matt, I think you recently had some chinch bug diagnoses from where was it?
I forget where they were, but probably on the eastern half, of course, where St. Augustine grass would be more common. But yeah, we had several samples come in for pathology analysis that also had very good populations of chinch bugs. I think at least 3 samples so far have come in with pretty high densities of chinch bugs.
So moving along to our shade trees and shrubs. Kept the list shorter this month, and things will start winding down as far as activities of our diseases. But powdery mildew is not one of them. Powdery mildew fungi will be quite in evidence as we get into the fall on many trees and shrubs. Also, as always, you have to be watching for Phytophthora and Armillaria root rots. And the little asterisk on Armillaria is because, yes, in September, this is when we typically start seeing the clusters of mushrooms. Not always. So you can have an infected tree where those mushrooms are not produced, but if you do see them, then you know that Armillaria is at least present. And they tend to be sort of a honey color and grow in clusters. Interestingly, we had a sample from the mountains Jerry Moody sent in that already had Armillaria fruiting bodies in the month of August, which was quite interesting. Bacterial leaf scorch we talked about in the past, especially on oak sycamores. You might see it on redbuds. Those symptoms are going to be persisting until the actual fall color masks them out and the leaves drop off. Didn't see as much of the symptoms on our redbud here out in front of the Marianne Fox building this year, which is interesting. Since it is a recurring disease, it's systemic and will persist in the tree. Nematode damage. Don't forget about the possibility that you've got something going on down there in the roots, especially with boxwoods azaleas, maybe a few other things. Shot hole on our flowering cherry and cherry laurel. Cercospora and Coronespora leaf spots. They're both pictured there in the upper right on big leaf hydrangea. And Rhizosphere needle cast on spruce. We had a recent sample of that come in as well. The fruit season is winding down, but on apple you may still see some black rot, bitter rot, and of course the sooty blotch and fly speck as cosmetic damage in the cuticle. Grapes, Pierce's disease, which again is the same bacterium, the Xylella fastidiosa, different strain that we talk about with bacterial leaf scorch. And those of you who have pecans may be dealing with scab and powdery mildew at this time of year. In the vegetable garden, basal downy mildew has been around, so you may be seeing it on your basil. Anthracnose, Rhizoctonia stem rot, and Cercospora leaf spot on any beans that you may have in the garden still. Cucurbits, downy mildew, powdery mildew. I left that on the list. It wasn't on my master BOLO list, but I thought, yeah, you can still be seeing that, especially on squash, pumpkin, maybe gourd, and the fruit rots. Tomato, always in the late season, be on the lookout for late blight, especially in the mountains. I didn't check to see how extensive it is this year. Haven't heard a lot about it though, which is good. Septoria leaf spot, a very common disease on tomato, and gray leaf spot as well, caused by Stemphillium. And then I tossed in growth cracks as well. There's a photograph here that came in to our database recently, and you can see, I think the corkiness around the top there may just be a varietal thing, but you notice the growth cracks from oftentimes they're attributed to inconsistent watering. So the growth of the fruit stalls, and then when it resumes again, you get the cracking. And of course that can lead to secondary rotting occurring. Finally, with the flowers and the perennials, powdery mildew on things like Coreopsis and Vernonia, ironweed, zinnia, rust on aster, ironweed, and possibly some other things in the garden. There'll be really some of the rust coming into their peak now. With peony, there's a disease called leaf blotch, but it's also called measles. So you get the idea that it can have either small or large spots, tend to be red, but so do most things that attack peony, seem to do red spotting. But that's a common one. Septoria leaf spot on Rudbeckia. We've been seeing it, of course, through the year, but you'll continue to see it. Likewise with the Phytophthora root rot and aerial blight on our annual vincas that will continue to occur. And poor zinnias. I love zinnias, but they suffer from alternaria leaf spot, bacterial leaf spot, both of which can get up on the petals, as well as the powdery mildew that was mentioned above. Check the chat here and see if there are any questions. I see have had them come into Lee as well over the last few. Oh, the chinch bugs, yes. Any other questions or comments? Seems like we're finishing just about on time.
I have a few announcements to share before we close out.
Not to say that people should tune out, but
So, can you hear me, Mike?
I can.
Okay, good. I got some kind of message on my that indicated I might have a sound issue, but good. So thank you both, Matt and Mike. That was excellent. Love the quiz. I think everybody loves the quiz. Just a few things before we finish up. Can you see my screen where I've shared the Joe-Pye weeds?
Sure can.
All right, excellent. So feature plant for this month, Joe-Pye weed. These have been in bloom for the last month and are just wonderful perennials for any garden that has a moist, that do like wetter soils. They will tolerate flooding. They can do okay in just clay or average, you know, soil that holds moisture, tender and mulched. So I do have information. I have some sound problems. Okay, but hopefully you can still hear me. But with Joe-Pye weed, we have a couple of different species. Actually, we have several species in the state, but the ones that, okay, so I see I've got some mic issues. So I'm gonna switch and see if I can get a better sound. Okay, does that eliminate the buzzing, or can you hear me now? Okay, that sounds better. Great.
Loud and clear.
With these Joe-Pye weeds, they're all big. They're all plants that grow, you know, 5 and 6 feet tall, but some are larger. So with hollow Joe-Pye weed, Eutrochium fistulosum, that's the biggest of our Joe-Pye weeds, and it can easily reach 8 feet. And it does occur across North Carolina as a native plant, and much more common in the west and central part of the state, and not quite as common in the east, especially as you get really close to the coast. But it is a wonderful architectural plant for the garden, and I love the stem structure on it. It tends to have, all of these Joe-Pye weeds will have whorled leaves, but with the hollow Joe-Pye weed, the stems are hollow, you have a nice long internode between these links, these leaf whorls, so it gives you this beautiful structure. And then, of course, the flowers on top, typically starting in August, early August, or even late July. Then with spotted Joe-Pye weed, Eutrochium maculatum, this one is, as a native plant, more isolated just to the western part of North Carolina, but can be grown as an ornamental plant across the state. And it gets to be about 6 feet tall. There's quite a few cultivars out there, Gateway and Little Red are two I've seen locally available. There's another species called Eutrochium purpureum or sweet-scented Joe-Pye weed that's similar, that you might also see growing in the wild, but it's not sold quite as much in the nursery trade. And then my personal favorite is what's known as coastal Joe-Pye weed, or Eutrochium dubium. And it is native more to the east and central part of North Carolina. And it's the one that the butterflies have been all over in my yard. I have several plants. On one plant alone, I counted 34 of these beautiful swallowtails on that plant. They certainly visit all of the Joe-Pye weeds. They just were particularly enjoying this one that I had named Baby Joe. So coastal Joe-Pye weed's a little bit shorter than the others, a little bit more, a little narrower too, and it reaches about 5 to 6 feet. And then there's been a couple of varieties introduced, both Little Joe and Baby Joe, which are a little bit shorter, but they're definitely still around 4 feet tall. So I'm just waiting for somebody to come out with an even shorter one and call it Embryo Joe. So these are wonderful plants to add to your landscape, both just for their beauty and for their toughness. The deer aren't particularly fond of them. That's not a guarantee. Deer won't nibble on them, but butterflies and other pollinators absolutely love them. So something you can add for color at a time of the year that can be tough to have color,
and also bring in a lot of pollinators. All three of these are in the plant toolbox, so you can visit the site and learn more about them. There was also a really extensive study by the Chicago Botanic Gardens that looked at many species of Eutrochium and relatives, and you can get a much more in-depth understanding of the family by looking up that study and reading it. It's about 4 pages, and there's lots of beautiful pictures of the different varieties. Close out with just a few announcements. Of course, our 40-year t-shirt is available. We're doing a pre-order to hopefully get a lower price. If we get enough people indicating they want to order the shirt, we can get some bulk pricing discount. So that's why we're doing the pre-order. And if you're interested, I will send out an announcement about that, a reminder about that again today. There's a Google form where you can pre-order the shirts, and then once we close that September 5th, they will be posted on the Logo Wear store, and you can order them from there. Order, pay, and they will be shipped directly to your home. So the Logo Wear store has many, many other items you might be interested in that have the Extension Master Gardener logo. You can special order so that it also has your county name on it. If you can't, you would need to contact them directly to have any kind of additions like that. But I do encourage you to check out the many, many products that are available on the site. Also mentioned this last month, but in case you weren't with us, we do have videos from Extension Master Gardener College posted, particularly from the keynote speakers, and then we have a lot of resources that our speakers shared. So you can visit that on both the public Extension Master Gardener portal. It's where you'll find the videos, and then the speaker slides are on NCSU Garden on the statewide site. So if you're able to check those out. Congratulations to our Search for Excellence winners. We will be holding a webinar November 13th at 10 a.m. to learn more about their projects and hear from the Master Gardeners involved in these projects. But we really appreciate the hard work many people, all of you, are doing across the state, and everyone who applied for Search for Excellence this year. They were all wonderful, wonderful projects. Winners of Search for Excellence do get a $200 award to use for their local Extension Master Gardener program, and that is funded through the endowment. And as we mentioned earlier, one way you can support the endowment is to get a Master Gardener license plate, which is available directly from DMV. And we currently still have some available with the old logo with the watering can. When those run out, it'll be replaced with our updated logo, which just has the NC State brick. So if you've been thinking about getting one and you want the watering can, now is a perfect time to do that. And then the Extension Master Gardener College in Virginia, the Master Gardener program has extended an invitation to all Master Gardeners in North Carolina who may want to attend. And you can register on their website online and visit Norfolk in September in just a few weeks. And have lots of great speakers lined up for that event and lots of great things you can learn there. And it would be a wonderful preview for the International Master Gardener Conference, which will also be held in Norfolk in 2021. So still some time to plan for that. So definitely mark that on your calendar and plan to attend. It will be at the same location that Virginia is holding their Master Gardener College this year, at the Main by Hilton. And we really encourage you to get it on your calendar and think about attending, and maybe attending as a group from your county. All of these announcements are available to Master Gardener volunteers across the state if you subscribe to our mailing list, which is moderated. So there aren't a lot of just replies that get posted to the list. I know at one time that was an issue, but we now have it set up as moderated. So if you'd like to hear these type of announcements, sign up for the list and you will get them directly to your inbox. And that is our Plants, Pests, and Pathogens webinar for today. Until next time, I wish you happy gardening. And next time, which will be September 24th, we will be joined by Barb Fair, who is our extension specialist in horticulture, one of our horticulture extension specialists, and she will be talking about caring for trees with storms in mind. So hopefully we won't have any of those in the area at the time, but it is certainly something we all need to think about. And we will close out in October with our final session for the year with Matt and Mike again sharing current plant, pest, and disease issues. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week and Labor Day weekend. I'm sorry, Mike, were you going to share something?
I was going to respond to Mac Johnson's comment there that got hidden in the scroll of the chat, but he mentioned we have lost a significant number of mature dogwoods dying. Most were in full sun in areas that had flooded. That doesn't surprise me too much. We saw and talked about the oaks having that problem that we suspect was because of the tremendous amount of rain that fell in the southeast part of the state, especially last year, followed by some dry weather in April, May of this year. So it's hard to say with just a brief description, but I'm not really surprised to hear you say that. And Barbara Fair may be a good person to talk to about that, because she and I actually were discussing this whole thing, and she knows more about it than I do. But the trees, they kind of remember those stresses that they have experienced in their lives and eventually just can't do anymore.
All right, thank you. And I just noticed a question as well about the Joe-Pye weed. Since they are so tall, especially if we get storms when they're in bloom, they can tend to flop over. And one way you can minimize that is by cutting the plants back in early summer, in May or June. If you cut them back, that will encourage them to branch a little more so they aren't quite as tall. And then otherwise, some kind of support or having other plants growing around them to help hold them up can help with that. More sun certainly helps too. When the plants are in full sun, they tend to be stronger stemmed. All right. So not seeing any other questions, we will close out with our music from Steve Bambera. Thank you all.